Hi, welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas podcast. I'm so glad you're joining us today. And we're excited because today I'm interviewing somebody who's been a great friend of mine for 20 years, Jon Tyson. And Jon Tyson's a pastor of Church of the City, New York. He's been living in New York now almost 15 years, faithfully leading church plants and helping many churches begin in that community and continues to do that so faithfully today. And I'm always excited to talk to him, and I'm excited for you to get to hear from him, because he's one of the most well-read people I know. This is the kind of guy that reads 100 books a year, probably more than that. But his retention's amazing. And anybody who's friends with Jon understands his retention. He reads a book, he remembers the quotes. I don't have that ability. I'm not that good, and I wish I was. I'm jealous of it because it's gives him such a leg up when we're entering into so many of these difficult conversations that we like to talk about around our Q Ideas events, around these conversations we're having today. And today, that's where I want to focus. I'm going to bring Jon in, and we're going to have a conversation around how this whole community has impacted him, this Christian community called Q Ideas, where for 15 years we've worked hard to try to bring some of the most thoughtful intellectual dialogues in place for church leaders, Christian leaders, institutional leaders, even people leading in their own companies and corporations. But as Christians, they want to faithfully engage culture. They want to hold true to what Scripture tells them is true about the world, about human beings, about human flourishing. And yet they know we're living in a real world where there's big questions, and there's not always spaces to ask those questions. And so for 15 years, we've created those spaces annually through our Q conference. This year, that's taking place April 22nd and 23rd in Nashville, and it's called the Culture Summit. It'll be our 15th annual Q event. And in addition to that, people can watch. You can be a part of it. Even if you can't join us with our limited audience we're able to have in Nashville, you can actually still join us virtually. You can also host a watch party. We have so many people that have been a part of this community that understand the value of bringing a group of friends together, sitting around the table, listening to talks, taking time to digest together, and talk about what does this mean for us. So this year is going to be no different. But right now, I'm excited to introduce you to Jon Tyson and welcome him into the conversation. So let's welcome Jon in. Hey, Jon Tyson, how you doing, man?
What's up, mate? How's it going? Good to see you.
Always good to see you. Yeah, you too, man. Well, man, I just want to chat a little bit about some of the things we talk about offline, but not always online. And I just think more and more pastors and leaders are hungry and interested in how to navigate the times and understand the tensions that we're all walking through together. And we've been doing that for 20 years together as friends. And, a few ways we do it is we come together and collaborate on different events and inviting different topics and talks through Q. And the ways that you've helped us, even with Q&A in November, you were part of those. We had 8 different topics.
I love that.
What were some of your takeaways, even from just that, when we were together in November, that stood out to you as a leader that were helpful?
Actually, I think the whole format was very, very helpful. I think, one of the observations I have is the reason everybody is so defensive in their cultural conversations is because everybody is framing everything as an accusation. And so it's producing defensiveness, putting people on their back feet, and it's shutting down dialogue. But having an environment where you can actually ask hard, honest questions and then discuss it, that was my takeaway. We need to reframe the way we engage in our cultural conversation.
Yeah.
So that was the big one.
And it's hard these days, right? Because everything's framed in these quick sound bites, Twitter. I mean, we all know that. But it's refreshing when you get into a space and you've got like an hour to talk about something and you can hear the different perspectives and you can kind of push back, but in a gentle way, in a learning way, and in a desire where you're saying, believing everybody at the table are people of goodwill. They want something good. Yes. We're not here to just tear each other down or to criticize or to make a statement out of this person. And I mean, we've always tried to do that over 15 years through our Q conference. And I just think these days it's getting harder to do it, but yet more important to do it. And so anyway, I'm excited. I'm excited that you're going to be with us April 22nd and 23rd in Nashville when we do our 15th annual. Can you believe it's been 15 years since that first one?
Gosh. It's unbelievable.
2007.
Getting old, man.
People didn't even care about cultural conversations 15 years ago, but now it's the only conversation.
No, it's actually true. They forget what a paradigm it was. I remember Andy Crouch's talk on creating culture, and it was like a revolution of thought. Nobody was talking about that. So thankful for your thinking and influence in that whole conversation.
Well, one of the ideas you mentioned to me this year, a book that you recently read that you thought was a pretty important book, worth conversation, was this book by Carl Trueman. I have it here. It's called The Rise and the Triumph of the Modern Self: Cultural Amnesia, Expressive Individualism, and the Road to Sexual Revolution. You're somebody who's more well-read than anybody that I know. So whenever you flag a book and you're like, hey, this is something to pay attention to, I like to pay attention to it. We went ahead and invited Carl to come be with us at this year's event to have this conversation. But I'm curious, for those who haven't read it or ever heard of Carl, what are some of those ideas that you just found were helpful for people right now?
Well, I think the great gift he does in the book is he basically fills in the gaps to explain culturally what's happened to enable us to be in the moment that we are in. So a lot of folks will go, it just feels like, I mean, you talk about what we were talking about 15 years ago versus what we're talking about now, even at Q. Many of these conversations would have been inconceivable. There would not even have been a plausibility structure to say, here's how we go from here to here. And it's happened in less than 15 years. And so what he does is he basically goes back hundreds of years and helps us see the theological, sociological, psychological schools of thought, leaders, pieces of influence that are threaded together to build a pathway for what we're dealing with right now. So to me, it just gives you a whole series of ahas and, oh, that's how that happened, and that's how that person's thought shapes what we are. So to me, it had tremendous explanatory power about where we are.
I know that's a strength of yours, is trying to understand context, understand history, help people in the setting we're in today, 2021, understand, why are we having these conversations? What are the roots of these ideas? Not just thinking every idea we're talking about some new idea, because it's usually not. It's built off of some foundation that has now spread and become more conversational at street level. But these ideas normally are coming out of some deep roots. And when we get exposure to that, I think it helps us settle in. I remember doing that at the Q&A event. We had John Mark Comer and Roberta Amundsen talking about church history and sort of deconstruction. And when Roberta, who's like a church historian, says, hey, look, this has been going on for 2,000 years. Like, there's nothing new happening right now, that people are deconstructing the Christian faith or scripture. Are you seeing that as a major challenge right now as you lead a church in New York City, that a lot of people who maybe grew up in the faith are walking away because they've adopted some new ideas that really aren't that Christian after all?
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of deconstruction. So there is a helpful kind of deconstruction. And what I mean by that is challenging ungodly Christianity. I mean, Jesus had a lot of tension with the religious leaders of his day. He called the Pharisees sons of hell, brood of vipers, whitewashed tombs. So there is legitimate parts of our faith tradition that have been co-opted, hijacked. We should be deconstructing those things. There is a lot of that happening, and some of that is very, very healthy. The other side of it, which is what I think you're addressing, is when people are basically giving up on the historic Orthodox faith. And to me, there is cultural anxiety, there's pressure from the world to conform, and as a result, people can't live with the dissonance and tension. Sometimes it's sincere. People are just having a crisis of faith. I think those people we should be very patient with. As it says in the book of Jude, be merciful to those who doubt. So we've got to walk with people who are legitimately struggling. But there's others who are just losing their way. They're just giving in. You know, they want the affirmation of the world, and they can't handle the rejection of our culture. And so a lot of those folks are just basically doing what Demas did, because he loved the world. He has forsaken the mission.
Yeah, and we found, that's happening more and more. We're going to have John Mark Comer actually at the Q Culture Summit, April 22 and 23, address that with a talk on where progressive Christianity leads, because there seems to be a path and a journey that people take when they start to move away from biblical foundations, biblical doctrine, into some of this new space. And sometimes, again, just like understanding history gives us perspective and frames, this, I think, will help people frame what's happening. And there's a lot of concern, I know, from pastors who want to navigate this well. Another topic that we're going to talk about, that I've invited you to talk about, it's kind of centered around another book you recently picked up, and I think you read this book quite often, Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald, right? Is that something you read all the time?
Yeah, man. Oh, gosh. That's like a classic. That's probably an annual read for me.
It's so good.
Like, it's really, I mean, because he's talking about leadership failure. He's talking about things that happen all the time, and it just feels like he gave some very timeless wisdom. Incidentally, after he wrote that book, he experienced personal leadership failure, had a moral crisis himself. So to me, it's a beautiful book. It's a great cautionary tale, and it's something that we need to have served up in a fresh way to consider.
Yeah, and I'm excited for you to help us understand better what are those kind of core disciplines? What are the rules of life that need to be present to keep our souls nurtured, to keep us grounded, rooted as we live these lives? We're also having Rich Villodas come and talk about the failure of celebrity Christianity, which kind of plays into that. Like this idea that celebrity has somehow become a part of Christianity. And I think part of that's the way the world works, right? The way media works, the way imagery works.
I agree.
We see these people, there's lots of cameras now, lights, Instagram, social media, and it's easy for them to start to move into this different ether. But man, that is problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I love Rich. He's obviously a fellow New York City pastor, and I love his observations, and he definitely lives what he is sort of critiquing here. Yeah, but hopefully he asked the question, how do we change the entire system? Because it just keeps on happening. It doesn't matter what your theology is. So you had the Reformed leaders fall. Driscoll, Darren Patrick, Tillian, these guys all just collapsed in the same way that faith leaders collapsed. Pentecostal faith leaders collapsed. We saw like different kinds of leadership failure, and the vast majority of it was they had platforms bigger than their character. And obviously there could be spiritual warfare that gets in that and sabotages leaders, and there's unprocessed issues from their past that sort of catch up to the weight of influence. But we've got to change the system, because maybe the system's broken because it keeps happening 3 or 4 times a year.
Well, what are other topics as you look at April 22, 23? I know this has been a place where you've come and you've learned quite a bit over the years, and you sit in there and you're taking notes. And as you look at the topics that we're addressing this year, what are a couple that jump out that you're kind of excited to hear more about?
Well, I definitely wanted to hear from Rich, so I'm looking forward to that. Lydia Dugdale's on the art of dying well. I think that's going to be very important.
She's there at Columbia University, by the way, in New York, and talking about, we're dealing with death so much in our culture right now through COVID. People are just very hyper aware of death. And she addresses how Christians think about that maybe differently. There's some sociology in there. There's some ways in which we need to think about the art of dying, which is not something we talk a lot about. So I think that's going to be really helpful to leaders.
Yeah, I totally agree. We as a generation tend to hide death. We put it in nursing homes, we put it in hospitals, we put it in hospice. It's away from us, it's at a distance. We've all felt the impact of that during COVID, so I'm really looking forward to what she's saying. I always love music. I'm looking forward to hearing street hymns through battle rap. I love jazz, I love hip hop. I'm looking forward to just hearing
Did
what
you
he's
know
got
what?
to say.
I was late to the game on battle rap and understanding how that works, that artistry, man. It is amazing. And he is amazing. Like his boldness and the way you do battle rap, right? Where you just, a lot of it's impromptu and you're literally battling. It's a battle of words, which is something I think you'd probably be good at this, Tyson. You should think about a career in battle rap with your instant recall of content. I don't know about your poetic ability, but.
Let me tell you, that's probably what the deficit is. It's probably putting it over.
We've got Danny Koke coming talking about this in action, sort of this in the race conversation. This year there were so many people that part of their way of participating was to post on social media and to say, "Hey, I'm with you," but how that can spike quickly and then go away, and then there's not really this long-term curve of support and help. And we want to expose and talk about. Why is it our ability? We jump in quickly, but is there really support there afterwards? And how does that impact the movement? I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's important. We need more than solidarity, which is the starting step, but like addressing how do you get to some of the structural stuff. I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah, and I think this one will be fun for you. John Lennox. We're talking about when humans become machines, and he wrote a book called 2084, which you're familiar with, Orwell's book 1984. He wrote a book about 100 years into the future, past that, and really this idea of transhumanism, which is something a lot of people haven't heard about, and it's this basic. It's essentially, some would call it a religion that is all about man merging with machine and technology, and this vision for eternal life. That's how people who don't know God would maybe think about the future. I want to live forever. How are we going to use technology to do that? Something I think Christian leaders must become more aware of quickly, because it's becoming normative for us to just start to adopt lifestyles and thinking and technology in a way. But if we don't understand where some leaders would like to see this go, we may be participating in something that's not part of our own flourishing.
Yeah, I hope he gets sort of like a theology of humankind in there or something like that. I mean, he's a genius, so I'm sure he will. But yeah, we already are. We're putting machines in as our hearts and prosthetic limbs, and those things seem to be very, very helpful. At which point do you cross the line where it becomes to sort of taking on blasphemy towards God, playing the role of God?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, gosh, we could talk forever about that. I don't know if God steps in or God steps back and says, if this is what you want, is it like Romans 1 wrath, where he just says, if this is what you want, you guys can go ahead and do it? Or does he step in and say, okay, you violated
like
Tower
of Babel, and it's like
Tower of Babel, yes.
all the tech breaks down. It crashes.
That's exactly right. We're left handwriting letters and being good actual neighbors.
Well, man, I love these conversations. I think anybody listening, I hope you're inspired by just the dialogue that needs to take place around so many of these important issues that we hardly have time to read all the books, right? It's just impossible to keep up with everything going on. And I know Q, for so many leaders, has been a place to come together and hear, how do we think about 2021 and beyond? How do we think well about it? Just final thoughts. I mean, what has this community meant to you over the years, Jon, and your leadership?
Oh, it's genuinely, it's been a gift to me. I mean, there's very, very few spaces where you get this range of important conversations. So on almost every issue that we've mentioned, there'll be a conference about it exclusively devoted to it. But to have all of these things in one space and to expand your mind and heart on current issues, I think has been really life-changing for me. So several of these talks I've heard at Q, like I moved neighborhoods based on a Q talk. I literally moved my family and my kids' schooling because I was so impacted by a talk. So it's not just intellectual fodder. It's not just snippets of exciting info. It's like it impacts my discipleship and my formation.
Yeah, well, thank you for...
I can't wait to see what happens
well,
this
thanks
year.
for all you've done to contribute to it and help me think through so many of these difficult topics. And we are big fans of you and your work, and so thankful for all you're doing. So thanks for being with us today.
No worries, mate. Always a joy.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing Jon's perspectives, and just it's always fun to catch up with such a good friend who's also navigating these areas and trying to do it well and trying to understand and seek to learn. You hear in even Jon's voice, he's a learner. He's a lifelong learner. We all have to be. We don't get the option to just settle on what we learned last year or the year before. We're in a moment where we must continue growing. We must continue trying to seek to understand, to better listen, to understand how our theology and what we believe is true that we gain from Scripture, how it applies to all of life today. And that's always been my passion in my heart, is try to help you understand the times and for us together to know what to do, know how to lead, know how to steward all that God's put in front of you, the people He's put in front of you. Maybe it's your children, maybe it's your friendships, maybe it's a community that you disciple, maybe it's your church, maybe it's the institution that you've been given this opportunity to lead in this season. We want to help you do that better. And so some of the topics we just mentioned will be a part of over 40 different conversations and talks and topics that you'll be exposed to over these 2 days, April 22nd and 23rd. But in addition, we're going to have over 50 breakout opportunities via Zoom that are going to give you the opportunity to interact live with these expert thought leaders. Some will be giving presentations at the Culture Summit. Others will be there just for these breakout moments where we're going to give you access to one-on-one with a group of people that are listening. Ask your own questions and hear from them directly. And so I'm excited for that opportunity, which is a new opportunity we have through the virtual side of this summit. But for those of you who've never been to a Q Ideas event, come join us. We still have a few spots available live in Nashville with this limited audience, but there's still a few available. You can go to qideas.org/culture summit, and you can register there, learn all about the topics, the events, the experiences happening in person. Or for the majority of you, I know you're not going to be able to join us, but will you mark those dates on your calendar now, April 22nd and 23rd? It's just a few weeks away, but block the time from 9 to 5 Central Time. You are going to have the opportunity to learn, hear, understand, see a future vision of where things might be going culturally, and what does that mean for us as Christian leaders to navigate that well, to navigate that faithfully. And I cannot believe the group of people that will be coming together to help you do that. We're excited about the group that's being assembled. And I hope that you will take advantage of that, not only for you, but for your family, for your church, for your staff, for those that you are called to lead. Let this be an opportunity to stir the conversations that maybe there's never time to have. There's not space maybe in your weekly meeting, or you haven't found the ability to bring up these difficult conversations. Let this be the reason you spend time this year being intentional in your own discipleship and your own mentoring and the way in which you want to model what it means to faithfully lead right now. So I hope you'll join us. Go to qideas.org/culture summit, and I hope you have a wonderful day.